Shalom. This week we are reading Parashat Korach. It's the story of the rebellion of Korach. And we read from the beginning of the Torah portion, Korach, the son of Yitzhar, the son of Kehat, the son of Levi, took himself to one side, took along with Datan and Aviram, the sons of Eliav, and On, the son of Pelet, descendants of Reuven. They took themselves and they confronted Moshe together with 250 men from the children of Israel. These were chieftains of the congregation, representatives of the assembly, men of repute, men of renown. They assembled against Moshe and Aharon and said to them, "You take too much upon yourselves, for the entire congregation are all holy, and the Lord is in their midst. So why do you raise yourselves above the Lord's assembly?" Moshe heard and fell on his face. He spoke to Korach and to all his company, saying, "In the morning Hashem will make known who is his and who is holy, and he will draw them near to him, and the one he chooses, he will draw near to him. Do this, Korach and his company, take for yourselves censers, place fire into them, and put incense upon them before the Lord tomorrow, and the man whom the Lord chooses, he is the Holy One. You have taken too much upon yourselves, ye sons of Levi." Here we have this incredible scene. Life in the desert, things are settling down now. After all, the decree has been made. Last week in the portion of Shalach, we learned of the debacle of the spies, and now the die has been cast, and the fate of this generation has been sealed. And I guess we should be settling down to the order of the day, to the routine, but we seem to be faced with what certainly appears to be a rebellion against Moshe and Aharon, but it's a complicated story, and there are so many things here that need to be addressed. The whole concept of the incense and this very unusual punishment of Korach being swallowed up by the earth. Why was it decreed by heaven that he and his company should be swallowed up in such a manner? So many details and so many levels of lessons that we can learn, and we want to try and approach a certain idea here. We won't be able to cover everything. I mean, what is this exactly? Is it a Western? We have like this shootout, we have this rendezvous in the morning. It's like, here they are, and here's how it's going to be from now on. We better get used to it, some voices could be heard to say. And there seems to be a power play, a showdown. So is Moshe saying, like, meet me in front of the corral at dawn? It would help us to understand, who is this fellow Korach? What was he really after? Our sages say that he actually was destined for greatness. He should have, could have, would have been the leader of all the Levites. On parallel, for example, with Aharon, who is the leader of the Kohanim, the priests. He was amazingly brilliant, came from very good stock. He was also very wealthy. Apparently he had been given a position of power while yet in Egypt. He had been given this position by Pharaoh himself. He was the overseer of all the royal treasure houses. And somehow all that wealth came to him. I guess he can't help it if he's lucky. He was also one of the Levites entrusted, no less, with carrying the Ark of the Covenant. This is a person of greatness. And yet, his wealth and his brilliance seem to lead him astray, because according to our sages, the depth of what's going on here is that he actually ended up denying God himself, denying that there was a God, denying that God created the heavens and the earth. This isn't about Moshe at all. It wasn't what it appeared to be. And by the way, that's in itself a manifestation of this brand new month of Tammuz, which we have just begun this week with this first Torah portion, because the concept of this month is about seeing things and how we don't see things as they really are, which of course is what the sin of the spies that we read about last week is all about, which was taking place in time during this very month. This was not a sincere, Occupy movement, some sort of movement for social change or social justice. Korach, who was a brilliant scholar, pious man, one of the people who carried the Ark of the Covenant, he ended up believing in nothing but himself. And this was about himself. When you believe so much in yourself, you can't believe in anything else. There's no room for anything else. But his whole thing was, I'm not even doing this for myself. I'm doing this for the whole nation of Israel. We're all holy. He riled up the people. He gathered them together against Moshe and Aharon and made this epic showdown. 250 of the greatest of the congregation. He dressed them all in talitot, made exclusively of the tchelet sky blue dye. So last week, in the end, the conclusion of Parashat Korach, we learned of God commanding the children of Israel in this commandment, this mitzvah, for the first time, that they should wear tzitzit, fringes on the edges of their garments, which affects a tremendous rectification of the whole concept of being in this world with garments and remembering Hashem, remembering our place. One string should be dyed blue. And so, of course, Korach symbolically was really saying, well, we're all holy. We don't need the one string, which is you, right? You and Aharon, you're like the one string. And that exempts the entire talit from its obligation of having blue in it, the one string. What if the whole talit is blue? Our sages teach that he also had a complaint about the commandment of mezuzah, and also about Shabbat, to tell you the truth. And these are amazing tikkunim, as it were, rectifications, these commandments that allow divine light into the minute details of our lives, our garments, our domiciles, time itself. And these are the things that he's going up against in the name of Israel, as it were, saying, you know, two things, saying, why are you in charge? Really, he was saying, why are you making up all of these things? And ultimately concluding that it's all fictitious. I mean, do you realize who these men were, Moshe and Aharon, that he's coming up against? So he says, we're all holy. And Moshe said Hashem will choose who he wants. I mean, I can understand Korach in a way because God already told us in the book of Exodus, you will be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. So what's wrong with what he's saying? One has to understand that if a person in this world has anything at all that can be called holiness, it all comes from above. A person can endeavor to sanctify oneself, and then God helps us. But Korach cut that connection. He wanted to take it all for himself. He pretended to be an activist on behalf of other individuals, and it almost seems as if he was pleading the cause of individualism. What? Is there no room for individualism in the Torah? Well, God forbid, of course. The Torah greatly encourages individual strength and individual development, but the strength of the individual comes from being bound together with the whole. And the selfless leaders of Israel, as exemplified by Moshe and Aharon, they have the power to unify the people, unite the people, and wield the nation's power of holiness. And the secret of individuality is through bitul, through the ability of one to nullify oneself to the greater whole, to the nation, to God, to creation. Korach was not about nullifying himself. It was all about him. When we think about Korach, his machinations, his true motivation, his claims against Moshe and Aharon, which were more than ridiculous. The truth is, he was really waging war against the Almighty himself, these commandments that he chose to complain about. Our sages tell us that between the lines he also was referring to Shabbat, and of course this confrontation with the talitot that our sages tell us, the 250 men that stood with these blue shawls symbolizing the imbalance, as he saw it, between Moshe and the nation. It didn't start out this way with Korach. He started out on the right path, but when a person believes only in himself, it becomes so big that there isn't any room for anything else. Everything, even creation itself, becomes null and void. But again, who was Moshe? Moshe is the person about whom we read. We just read earlier, a few weeks ago, in Numbers chapter 12, we read, and the man Moshe was very humble, more than any other person on the face of the earth. And actually, we read there, if we recall, that whole episode when Aharon and Miriam were speaking ill of Moshe, when the three of them went out, Hashem descended in a pillar of cloud and stood at the entrance of the tent. And he summoned Aaron and Miriam. The two of them went out. He said, "Hear now my words." God said, "If there shall be prophets among you, in a vision shall I, Hashem, make myself known to him. In a dream shall I speak with him. Not so is my servant Moshe. In my entire house, he is the trusted one. Mouth to mouth do I speak to him, in a clear vision and not in riddles. At the image of God does he gaze. Why did you not fear to speak against my servant Moshe?" That's quite an approbation that we find from God himself. And then, of course, we recall a bit earlier in the book of Exodus, after the debacle of the golden calf, in chapter 32 and verse 32, we find that Moshe was entreating forgiveness for the people of Israel. And he said, "And now, if you would but forgive their sin, but if not, erase me now from your book that you have written." It's one of the most powerful statements ever made by a human being, that I am so dedicated to my people, that I am so willing to die for them, that I don't care if I never even existed altogether. This is a very unique quality of the very opposite of Korach, of nullification. So someone told me something this week, and I have to thank a very special person who brought this to my attention. I think it's one of the coolest things I've ever heard. I want to share it with you. Somebody's listening to a podcast on some station about health and wellness. And the podcast is called "Chlorophyll, Sunlight, and Solar-Powered People?" Question mark. And it's a podcast by someone named Sayer G, who I am not giving an approbation to. I don't know anything about him, but he is called on his own website a widely recognized researcher, author, and lecturer, and a member of the advisory board on the National Health Federation, and the founder of the world's most widely referenced evidence-based natural health resource of its kind. He founded something called greenmedinfo.com in 2008 in order to provide the world to an open access evidence-based resource supporting natural and integrative modalities. But basically, what was this podcast about that this person brought to my attention? It goes like this. Scientific research. You see, people always thought that plants get their energy from sunlight and humans get theirs from food, and there's no overlap, right? Plants get their energy from sunlight, photosynthesis. And the abundant energy of the sun was thought to be pretty much useless for mammals, whereas plants got it all for themselves, and we, of course, eat the plants. And so this fellow, Sayer G, on this podcast is basically confronting this and asking if it's really that simple, and stating that according to research coming from the Columbia University Medical Center, says there's considerable possibility that animals, including human, may be solar powered. What does he mean by that? He explains that when we consume green vegetables, the chlorophyll metabolites, I know a lot about this, appear to enter the mitochondria, where they work together with sunlight to supercharge energy production in our cells. It goes on to speculate maybe that's why people get an energy boost from juicing and drinking more green smoothies, pumping up green vegetable consumption. And he says science is beginning to back this up. And in this particular episode of this podcast, Underground Wellness, he talks about this new paradigm in human energy production. What caught my friend's attention was an assertion that he makes in this presentation, where he states that according to this research, a human being could actually live without food or water for a very long time, for many months in fact, as long as the person has a good source of light. What's amazing about this? Sounds like photosynthesis. He's saying a person could actually live off of lights. Why I find this to be absolutely amazing and worthy of your time in the middle of Parashat Korach is because, you know, the great Rambam, for example, Maimonides, was a great rationalist. He had a very interesting approach to understanding the concept of some of the miracles that are described in Torah. And he maintains that when a miracle is described, wherever possible, we should endeavor to find an explanation that would place it within the parameters of the natural. That doesn't at all mean that it's not a miracle, according to the common definition. It just means that we have an understanding of how miracles occur in Hashem's world. And it also doesn't mean that it's not directly being affected by God himself. But in Deuteronomy 9, verse 9, and again in Deuteronomy 9, verse 18, we learn that twice Moshe was on Mount Sinai with God for stretches of 40 days and 40 nights, and he says, I neither ate bread nor drank water. And think about those occasions when Moshe was closer to the light, to the source of living light than anyone has ever been. So can we imagine what it was like for Moshe to be with God on Mount Sinai? Why does he go out of his way to tell us that he partook of no food or water? Were his bodily needs suspended? Or could it be that he was nourished directly from the light? Thank you, Sayer G, for that podcast. Pretty fascinating, but in my humble opinion, whatever the case, I just know that about you and me, they don't tell such stories. And they certainly don't tell such stories about Korach either. And this is the man that Korach is confronting? For what? Why did Moshe fall on his face? Why was he so upset? He didn't make anything up here. He knew what this meant, this showdown for the Jewish people, because he knew that Korach's issues were not about him, but about God himself. And his whole manipulation of saying how it's really for everyone, feigning concern, you know what? This is a very well-known agenda today. It's copied by many sectors, and it's done to promote a particular agenda. So this man, Korach, who carried the Ark of the Covenant pretty close to the light, how could he end up denying God himself and his being the creator? This is actually something that happens every day. Now Aaron, right? Aaron had been chosen from way before. And what is Aharon all about that Korach should confront him? Aharon is the very embodiment of peace, of the peacemaker, of the self-nullifying element within Israel that brings everything together for everyone else's sake. He is the very opposite of Korach. What does it teach us in chapters of the Fathers? Pirkei Avot, chapter 1 and Mishnah 12, it says, Hillel says, be from the students of Aharon. Love peace, pursue peace, and bring people closer to Torah. So Moshe said to Korach, meet me in the morning. And morning is this concept of newness, of renewal. And every morning is like a new opportunity, a new choice. Hashem is choosing who he chooses every morning, just as Israel accepts God's kingship anew every day. And every day there is what's called in our sacred sources, there's a thread of kindness that God extends into the world. And that's like the aspect of Aharon, who himself is a vessel prepared to bring peace into the world. And this is why Korach argued about tzitzit, about the fringes, because the tzitzit are like a concept of a capsulization, a tzimtzum, a way of the endless, infinite lights of Hashem's goodness and compassion being channeled into this world. That's what it really stood for. And it's always with us no matter what. And Moshe wanted to demonstrate to Korach that he and Aharon, they're not private people. This is not their own thing, but they are vessels. And just as the morning light is essential for the world, so too their capacity to bring the potential into actualization, of bringing Hashem's light into the world, it's for everyone. And the stick, what's the message of the stick that blossomed? You know, they took sticks that were all cut from the same piece, from the same stalk, all dry wood, all identical. And Aaron's rod blossomed that was something that came, and that was a miracle. And that was Hashem's sign that he chose Aaron. That's something that's coming from within this dry wood. Aaron is symbolic of this life force that can only be brought into the world by someone who could be designated as a vessel from that from the very beginning. And he's bringing that out from the source, bringing everything to a point of holiness, like that string of blue. And we read in chapter 17 and verse 21 that Aaron's staff was among theirs. That expression, the beautiful expression in the verse, his staff among theirs, because it's this whole idea of this inclusiveness of the children of Israel. The service of the Kohen serving God bears fruits, but his accomplishment is not through his own work. It's that he is able to gather together all of the efforts of the entire people and take that potential into reality. And so Korach's showdown is a desire to usurp this order out of his own arrogance, out of his own will to receive and not to give to others. And this is the secret, according to some commentaries, a very beautiful idea of why this Torah portion, our Torah portion this week, precedes the Torah portion of Chukat next week. Next week we're going to be reading the portion of Chukat, which of course begins with and features the ordinance of the red heifer, which we'll certainly talk more about. That is the greatest mystery, how that works, why God chose the chok, the ordinance of the red heifer, to bring about the return of purity. But actually, this is not the logical order. This is not the chronological order, and as we have had occasion to mention recently, there is no chronological order in Torah because it's not a storybook. It's a book of the revelation of Hashem's will. Actually, the commandment of red heifer, our sages teach, was given at a place called Mara way back in Exodus chapter 15. And why, state our sages, was Parashat Chukat next week, beginning with the red heifer, placed after Parashat Korach? Because Korach's whole claim against Moshe and Aharon was based on his own self-image and his own conception and his own arrogance. Moshe is the only person in the world who ever understood the mystery of the red heifer, how it works, because he was the embodiment of nullification, of not being concerned about himself, about not having a life and living only for his people. And the secret of the red heifer can only be understood through that level of selflessness. And Korach, of course, is the very opposite. And as it were, God's placement of the parsha of Chukat, featuring the red heifer, following Korach, is almost like a statement saying to Korach, you see this? This is the difference between you and Moshe. This is why you can't be in that position, because he was able to understand this great mystery and you not, because you are all about yourself. Moshe and Aharon, they are all about bringing the divine light into the world, living for their people, living for all of creation, making the world into a better place. And one of the major lessons, I believe, of this week's Torah portion is repeated in every generation, how we all have to, as it were, explore this within ourselves, stand guard against the concept of taking something for ourselves, of the limelight, of wanting to usurp the natural order of things. The individual is very, very important. And we are encouraged to serve Hashem, each of us with our own strengths, with our own special qualities, and every single person is adding something to the universe. It's an orchestration that with missing one note, it won't work. But we all reverberate and resonate to the orchestration of the true leaders who live for Hashem, who reflect that light. And that is really the challenge in every generation, for us to understand how best to bring the divine light into the world.